and get started. It's my pleasure to introduce Alistair Woodward and Kirsty Wild, both from the University of Auckland, and they'll be telling us they both have distinguished careers. Alistair's a little longer than Kirsty. He's a senior figure in climate research and has been involved in the IPCC in a number of ways. The work that will be presented today, though, is on Kirsty and Alistair's work on the bicycle and interdisciplinary approaches to this topic and health among epidemiologists, social scientists, and transport researchers. So maybe I'll stop here and I'll let you take it away, Kirsty and Alistair.
All right. Well, look, I'll start just by sharing my screen so that people know that they're in the right place. I hope that's working for everyone. Can you see that, Rob?
Yep.
Okay. Well, firstly, just quick introductions. Thank you. As you said, I'm Alistair Woodward. I'm a professor in epidemiology and biostatistics at the University of Auckland. As you delicately referred to it, John, I'm a bit older. I've got a long history, a long length of experience in environmental health generally, but more recently with a strong interest in climate change and transport. And Kirsty's my colleague. Kirsty, do you want to just say a little bit about your background?
Yes, so kia ora koutou, everyone. Yeah, really looking forward to having a chance to chat with you all today about our work on happiness, health, and the bicycle. I'm an environmental sociologist. I kind of studied across the environmental and social sciences. And I love projects where we see that sort of intersection between sustainability and well-being, and the bicycle is clearly one of those. So been involved in this work for about 5 years with Alistair, and yeah, looking forward to sharing some of it, to getting your feedback on it, to talking about it.
So this is actually my second USC seminar. I was just looking back, and it's 10 years ago, almost exactly, that I visited your campus and gave a seminar. But what I really remember about that day was that John Samet took me out for dinner afterwards, and we went to a Mexican restaurant that had the most amazing Mexican food. I've never had anything like it since. So the world's changed. Fewer opportunities.
That's descriptive.
Fewer opportunities for interactions of that kind, but Zoom does open new doors, and yeah, no, delighted to talk to you. So as Kirsty mentioned, we've got this research program on active transport and looking particularly at the future of the bicycle. And what we're going to do today is quickly introduce you to some of the work we're doing. I'm going to talk for the first half, roughly about 20 minutes, I hope, and Kirsty's going to talk, take up the second half. And if we do it well, there'll be good time for questions and discussion, which I'm looking forward to. So this is the starting point, and I guess these statistics are probably familiar to you in the United States as well, that the transport sector is a major contributor of greenhouse gas emissions, and certainly in our country, it's the most rapidly increasing sector in terms of its contribution. The transport system doesn't work very well in terms of getting people around. Our cities are pretty clogged. People find it very frustrating. We have major health issues associated with the lack of physical activity. And in New Zealand, our road safety statistics are actually going in the wrong direction. So a system that's sort of failing in so many ways, and we're very interested to see whether active transport, and in particular the bicycle, can make a positive contribution, as Kirsty said, at the sort of intersection really of sustainability and health and efficiency. So what I'm going to do is to explain why we've chosen to focus on the bike. I'm going to go through the first 4 of these headings here, and then pass over to Kirsty to talk more about the idea of the experience of the bike, the evidence that just continues to stack up about how the bicycle is in fact a joy-inducing machine, and why that might be and how we might harness it. But I wanted to start just with a bit of the history, because I think it's sort of relevant. You know, that question of who built the first bicycle. I mean, I'm not sure that anybody really knows, but it may well have been Carl von Dray. And this is a picture of Carl von Dray and his bicycle, which was known as the pedestrian accelerator back in the early 19th century. The important point, I think, is that this diagram looks familiar. I don't think anybody would have trouble in recognizing this as an early ancestor of the bicycle. 2 wheels in line, very importantly, with one of them being a steering wheel, you know, upright passenger, rider or conductor, as it was called. This version of the bicycle, even though it's sort of deficient in a few respects, was remarkably effective. And von Dray demonstrated that he could cover 10 miles in the hour on this without getting too tired by it. This was the background to the quote you can see on the right-hand side. And so it was called the pedestrian accelerator for a very good reason. Well, the bicycle speed record has a bit advanced since 1817. This is the woman who I think currently holds the world record for the bicycle, traveling on a bicycle, 180 miles an hour on the Bonneville Salt Flats, not all that far from where you guys are. And you can see that the machine hasn't changed a great deal. You still have the 2 wheels, you still have the upright rider, the seat. Some things have changed: the rubber tires, the pedals, and the gearing. But otherwise, it's still, the same pedestrian accelerator model, really. And it is indeed the most efficient way of transferring human energy to movement. A remarkably simple and effective machine. This is another point about the bicycle that I wanted to underline, in that it is remarkably well tuned to human physiology. The first point being that we know that muscles work best when they contract quickly against a moderate load. That's just the nature of muscle fibers. And of course, the gearing on bicycles permits that to happen. You can maintain a comfortable cadence, and you might have seen the amazing gearing on the bike in the slide before. I don't think it was, I don't think you'd be able to get started on that bike without assistance, but once you're traveling quickly, the gearing would enable, the rider to travel at awesome speeds. Another important aspect of the bicycle is illustrated in this picture. I don't know if you remember the America's Cup from 2017, when the New Zealand team won the contest. And one of the reasons why they did so well was that they didn't use the conventional approach to sort of powering the hydraulics and the systems on the boat, they introduced what were called cyclors, sailors who were cyclists. The reason that worked so well was that the bicycle uses the biggest muscles in the body, the thigh muscles, the lower limb muscles, just got so much more power in them because they're bigger, they've got more fibers and so on. And so you can exert more power and go for longer with less fatigue. And that was sort of vividly demonstrated in that yacht race. The America's Cup that was just held didn't have cyclors in them because they were banned. It was decided that it gave an unfair advantage. Seems a peculiar way of thinking. Now, the second point about what makes the bike special, I think, is that it is extraordinarily nimble. And just to illustrate this, I wanted to show you this map. We've done some work trying to harvest Strava Metro data to look at where cyclists actually go. There's not much information really from traffic counts about numbers of cyclists on the road and where they travel. And Strava, which you may be aware is an exercise app, mainly provides this product called Strava Metro to cities, which sort of aggregates all the Strava data for that city. In here, the Strava data is shown in orange, and the blue lines mark out the city's cycle network, at least at that stage a few years ago. And the point I just want to make is that sometimes cyclists go where the cycle network runs, and in the sort of top left of that corner, you can see some roads where the blue and orange lines overlap. And elsewhere, the cyclists don't use the network and they travel elsewhere. And there's a straight road coming down from the city, which sort of goes through the middle of a cycle network, which is hardly ever used. And the reason being, cyclists essentially they're able to go in the most direct way. They're not constrained in the same fashion that motor vehicle traffic is. They can cross the city in a much more sort of uninterrupted fashion. And this is demonstrated in these events. I don't know whether you have them in Los Angeles, where every year there are sort of races to see who can get to work fastest. And in this particular instance, it was these 4 individuals in Wellington who were timed to how fast they would be able to get to work from one of the suburbs. This man took the bus, took 49 minutes, the train 48 minutes, the car 46 minutes, and this dude on his bike got there in half an hour. Now that's a sort of common pattern. Here's an Auckland event, traveling from New Lynn into the central city district, and you can see car, train, bus, and cycle, with the bike being the fastest way of getting there. And the other interesting point about this slide is, I think, is that the individuals were asked to predict how long it would take them to do their journey, and you can see that the cycle trip was the most predictable. Look at that poor person in the car. They sort of predicted they would take half an hour and they ended up taking 1 hour and 8 minutes. So the variability, the predictability, the confidence about arrival time, those are points that Kirsty is going to talk a bit about later on. The e-bike, something also that Kirsty will mention because we've done quite a lot of work on electric bikes. Our sense is that this really is a transformer, potential transformer, and as well as extending the range of people who can use a bike comfortably, and that's what's shown here. This is just a simple description of the male-female ratio, people riding different kinds of bikes at a major intersection in our city. And you can see that the gender balance is more even for e-bikes than it is for push bikes. As well as drawing in new people, it also extends the range and the types of journeys that people can take. The argument that's made, certainly in New Zealand, I don't know, but I'd predict it might be the same in your city, is that this is all very well, but is it safe? There's a sense that cycling is a dangerous activity in a modern city. And so one of our studies tried to get to the bottom of this by looking at routinely collected data. We were able to draw on the hospital data and on also our Accident Compensation Corporation. We have a system in New Zealand where people who suffer injury can make a claim and get all their costs recovered so that they don't have to pay for treatment and recovery. And here you can see the risk of injury per million exposure. I'll just explain that quickly, and accident claims, which are in white. The exposure idea was, we thought for each activity we would define a sort of usual or standard activity. So the bike was a half-an-hour bike ride. DIY means do it yourself at home. So that's people climbing up ladders and cleaning out gutters and things like that. So, you know, a couple of hours of DIY. Horse riding, a morning of horse riding. Now, the point there, it's a log scale. I think you can see that there isn't actually any evidence that riding a bike is any more dangerous than spending a couple of hours fixing up stuff around your home. Or going for a horse ride. But what really got publicity when we did the study and published it was the rugby story, you know, that we said cycling's approximately 500 times safer than playing rugby. And so all the parents who said, well, I'm not really comfortable about letting my son or daughter ride a bike to rugby practice, because it's not safe, should have, you know, it would be more logical to say, I'm happy for my son and daughter to go off on their bike, but I don't know about playing rugby. It's not safe. We looked also at the mortality story, and we were able to do that because New Zealand has this arrangement whereby we're able to link our national census with mortality records and other health outcomes as well in a probabilistic way. And so having access to the census, able obviously to sort of take account of many other factors that may be important. There's a question in the census about how did you travel to work on the day before or on the census day itself. So a standard question that's been asked now for some time. And you can see in this table that most people drove to work, but there were some who cycled, and the mortality, subsequent mortality in this group was not raised, as you might expect if injury was a significant problem. In fact was reduced, that the lowest mortality amongst any of the transport groups was amongst the cyclists. Now, why should that be? Well, we did some modeling work, which I know people in Los Angeles have done and other cities as well, trying to anticipate what the effects might be of shifting a small proportion of short car trips from to bicycles, given all we know about the relationship between traveling by different modes and health outcomes. And you can see down the bottom there that if nothing else changed, you had more people on bikes, yes, you would expect to have more deaths from road crash injury. You would also expect, for having fewer people driving, that vehicle pollution would be reduced, and so the deaths resulting from air pollution would be reduced. So there's a small gain. But the biggest impact of all is the consequence of increasing the amount of physical activity that people take. And that, in our estimate, might be responsible for over 100 avoided deaths a year. So I've talked about those first three headings. The fourth one is what's relevant, I guess, particularly to your interests and our interests in climate change. The point that the bicycle is extraordinarily frugal in terms of its carbon footprint. That same modeling study that I just talked to you about, obviously we looked at what would be the consequence of a modest shift of this kind on the numbers of motor vehicle kilometers traveled, and that flows through into savings in terms of petrol and diesel consumption, and also in terms of tailpipe emissions. So about 50 kilotons of carbon dioxide avoided if we made this shift in trips. Now, that's not a huge amount compared with the national net carbon emissions, but it's not trivial either. And the important point is that this calculation is actually an underestimate of the contribution that active transport makes to reducing emissions, because we know that cycling actually not only displaces car trips, it also replaces the kind of trips that people do, and people tend to stay local rather than to travel long distances. It activates the use of public transport because there's an opportunity for people to ride to the train station, take the train, ride to their destination, or possibly do the same with the bus. And this interesting idea, that actually quite a few car trips are taking people places, taking other people places. And if you have a transport system that enables a wide range of people, including children, to ride their bikes or to walk, then those trips are unnecessary. And there's a study that's just been released, just been published a couple of months ago, based on the European Pastor study. Christian Brand was from Oxford, was the lead author, in which they drew on those European cities that are part of Pastor, and took full account of these factors that I've just listed here to estimate the difference in carbon emissions due to travel amongst those who cycled regularly and those who didn't. And you can see it's a substantial difference between those who rely on the motor vehicle and those who are able to use a bike to get around every day. A big difference. Now, I'm almost finished my bit of the talk. We've got a Zero Carbon Act, which commits New Zealand to certain climate goals. And as part of that, we have an independent climate commission, which is looking at just how to reach those goals, has released recently its first report on how we might do it. And rather controversially has great enthusiasm for the electric car and suggests that this will be the way we'll manage our transport issues. This man here is a former transport minister, Simon Bridges, and this idea that the electric car is the cleanest option, is the way to deliver what we need from the transport system from a climate point of view, is quite pervasive. So I was interested in that same paper that I just mentioned, the Brand paper, which for the first time, to my knowledge, undertook a comprehensive life cycle analysis. So this is looking not just at the tailpipe emissions present or absent, but looking at the carbon costs over the full life of a motor vehicle or a bicycle in terms of its production, its distribution, its disposal, and so on. And you can see that their estimate was carbon dioxide, the difference in terms of carbon emissions per trip between a bicycle and a conventional internal combustion engine car was sort of 30 times. The bicycle was 30 times more efficient, 30 times cleaner. But look, see where the electric car sits. Sure, it's an improvement perhaps on petrol or diesel, but it still carries a substantial carbon cost. And if you were really looking, Mr. Bridges, for the cleanest option, you would be looking at the bicycle. So I've outlined some of our work. I'm an epidemiologist. I've been talking mainly about sort of epidemiological work that we've been doing, counting and comparing. But this only tells half the story about what makes the bicycle special and why it makes for a good public health investment in our view. I'm going to pass over now to Kirsty to fill in that other half. Kirsty.
Thanks, Alistair. I think you might need to stop sharing and then I will start sharing. Okay. Great. Okay, thanks for that, Alistair. I'm going to talk a little bit about our work on cycling experience. The bicycle makes the eyes smile. This is the title of a lovely Italian paper, actually, on the experience of older men who cycle. We did a couple of studies that looked at cycling experience, particularly e-cycling experience. We interviewed people who were regular e-cyclers, and we also did a small trial at one of our hospitals where we gave people an e-bike for a month and then sort of talked to them before and after about what the experience was like. I found it really interesting, perhaps not surprising, that I wanted to talk to people about the experience of riding an e-bike. But people were equally keen, if not more keen, to talk to me about what it was like driving previously, how unhappy they had been with their previous transport experience, how stressed they were getting driving, and that being a key motivator for switching to an e-bike. And I guess which made me kind of a bit interested in the research on transport satisfaction. Like, what do we actually know about? And we hear a lot about, oh, it's difficult to get people out of their cars because people just love cars. I'm sure you have the same discourse in the States. So I guess I started to dig into this. Charles Montgomery picking this up in his popular work, Happy City. Cyclists tend to be the happiest commuters. Going to some more scientific work, this is an infographic that kind of summarizes what the research shows about who are the happiest commuters. And so that tends to be whether you look at like your mood during the commute, but also your overall satisfaction with your commute experience. And most of this research is on commute experience. So we see this similar pattern in lots of studies. It's a bit complex. It's not just the mode that you use, it's also the amount of time that you spend commuting, and it's also how congested your commute is. The other big thing is whether you're alone or not. But what we see consistently is that people that cycle and walk are the happiest with their commute. So we decided to use our e-biking studies, bring them together with other studies on cycling experience, bring in exercise science, transport psychology, bring it together and do a bit of an exploration about why cyclists might be the happiest commuters, or why active transport users in particular might be. So this is our paper, Why Are Cyclists the Happiest Commuters? We found that looking through all the research, there's probably 4 main factors behind why cyclists are the happiest commuters. Alistair's already mentioned control a little bit, arrival time reliability, the feel better effects of moderate exercise, sensory activation, and greater social opportunities. So I'm just going to go through these 4, pull out some examples, some quotes from our participants, and just talk about what we've learnt from exploring cyclist experience in terms of the future of transport research, and that the need for more focus perhaps on salutogenic exposures in environmental health. I think Alice has put this picture up before and illustrated it quite well in terms of those comparisons between how long it takes for people to get places. But in Auckland, we now have to add on an extra 50% of trip time if you're in a car, in order to ensure that you actually get somewhere on time. And this is the thing that participants in our e-bike studies talked about a lot, how incredibly stressful that is. So when you look at, I think I took the slide out, but when you look at the emotions, I showed that a bit before in the Montgomery slide actually, but people in a car are the most likely to report feeling stressed. And it's because basically you have to concentrate quite a lot to keep yourself and everyone else safe, but you're just doing that constant stop start. You don't know when you're going to be there. There's an overwhelming feeling of lack of control when you're driving in conditions like this. So I'm just going to have to move this one so I can read my quotes. Some quotes from our participants. At the moment, the Northwestern motorway is such a dog that I can get more reliably home on the bike than I can in a car. The car varies between 45 minutes to 2 hours, depending on what's happening with traffic. Whereas a bike, I know it'll be an hour. I know I'll be home in an hour. Particularly important, arrival time reliability and feeling in control when you've got care responsibilities. So this woman's saying you could leave for work in a car and sometimes it's 15 minutes and sometimes it's 45 minutes. And if you're going to pick the kids up, you can't be plus or minus an hour. So people who walk and cycle have the highest feelings of what we call commuting competence. So that feeling that you're in control of your commute, you can leave when you want, you know when you're going to arrive. So cycling and walking, they both provide, they're open air and they're slower, and they involve moving your body, so they provide lots of opportunities for multi-sensory activation, sensations both from inside and outside the body. And cyclists talk about this a lot in terms of what they enjoy about cycling. I think there's a bit of a perception that this is something that people find unpleasant about cycling, but obviously there are sensory conditions which are unpleasant, heavy traffic, really pouring with rain, but on the whole, people actually really talk about really enjoying the opportunity to be outside, to see more stuff. You can see in this picture here, it shows what you can actually see going at different speeds. So you feel more and you notice more. I realized that when you're on your bike, even though the road you went on is just there and you're cycling just there, it's maybe just 5 to 20 meters away from the road that you've driven on for years. Actually, you see things because you're on a bike, you're slower, you can stop, look to the side and not crash into someone. So I saw these things just like trees and greenery, hills, little reserves, little picnic tables. And then I see plaques, little historic plaques. So lots of people talked about developing quite a new relationship with their neighborhoods and their local environments, where they saw lots of stuff that they had just never noticed before. And as a result of that combination of like more sensory input, perhaps going a bit slower, having that opportunity to notice stuff, people who walk and cycle have more experience of flow and a loss of sense of time, that positive absorption in your environment. Yeah, it's weird because I'm not really into nature, but I feel like I'm in nature. I'm going past a tree. I'm just like, oh, so pretty. You go past the water, so pretty. So I feel like it's nice. It's a pleasant journey, I suppose. I keep saying to my friend, it takes me 40 minutes, but it feels like a 10-minute bike ride. Exercise, I probably don't need to go into this too much in terms of why exercise is a mood booster. But perhaps just one thing to note is that cycling tends to provide moderate intensity exercise, which is the intensity of exercise which is experienced as the most pleasurable by the majority of people. Not everyone, but yeah. Social interaction, I think this is super interesting, and I think something that people don't think about so much in terms of active transport. This is a really cool study called Hoodie Goody Buddy. That's kind of a funny title, but anyway, what they did is they simulated the view from 4 different modes. I don't actually have the bike view here, and then they got, hey buddy,
What is screen sharing?
I've got my my little boy home with me today because it's Saturday morning. So what they did is they got kids to pretend to fight over a bit of paper, and then they simulated the view from the 4 different modes, and they got people to ask people what they thought was going on. And the people who were in the open air modes, they were walking or cycling, or in a slower mode, which is from the bus. I think the average speed of a bus in Auckland is 8 kilometres an hour. They could all tell that the kids were pretending they were playing, and the people in the car could not, they thought they were fighting. And the reason for that is that we make, if we're going fast, we make snap judgments, and when we make snap judgments, they're more likely to be negative. We need we need more information. We need longer to make positive judgments that we're safe, and that's just an evolutionary thing in terms of you need to be able to quickly identify that's a snake, you know. But we need to keep collecting information a bit longer to feel safe. So as a result, people who use a bike, or they walk, or they use the bus, they actually feel safer in their neighborhoods. They like their neighborhoods more, and part of that is just about the mode that they're using. Yeah, they also get more everyday social interaction, as well as liking their neighborhoods more, feeling safe in them, despite in some ways being more vulnerable in them. Yeah, they get more social interaction. Yeah, me and my friend, we had a lovely ride last week. We just meandered along and talked. All these different people were out. Someone was walking a dog, someone was jogging. You just say hello. Oh, I really like chatting with other bikers. My car's really old. It's got no radio, silence, 50 minutes of silence thinking in my own head. It's really not fun. I went past some guy yesterday and he had a high vis with dad printed on the back. I was like, so cool. My fluorescent jacket is the pinkest thing you've ever seen with a flashing light in it on the back. And he was like, you think my high vis is cool? You just don't get that in a car. Yeah, so I think that's probably one of my favorite things. I think the other thing that people talk about that they really like, particularly with cycling, is the flexibility of social interaction. You can get in there, you can have social interaction, but you can also get out of there. In terms of commute, I could either drive, take the train, or cycle. Driving's horrendous. It makes me really anxious. No one is very friendly. The train is pretty good. You can read, but when sometimes other people aren't having a good day and they're a bit in your face. With cycling, it's actually quite social if you want it to be. And I often chat to people at the lights because I'm chatty, but you don't have to if you don't want to. And you can also go fast or not go fast, depending on how you're feeling. It's quite adjustable. And I think that that adjustable thing was something that people brought up a lot in relation to cycling. You know, it's part of being reliable, you know, You can go faster or slower if you're running a bit late. You can get social interaction that you want or not. And particularly e-biking, like it just enhances that further, right? You know, if you're tired, you can up the assist on it. So you can have control over, even more control over those things that people really like the sensory input, being on time or not, the social interaction, etc., etc. People really like feeling in control of their experience, not surprisingly.
Okay, Siri. Okay, Siri.
Hang on a minute. So I think that something that it really made me think about is, why do we not hear about this stuff more? Why aren't we so interested in pleasurable experience? It's really critical for exercise motivation, and yet it's not something that people talk about heaps in public health and environmental health. I think particularly in transport, we still have a focus on just efficiency, this understanding of travel as kind of dead time, as something, commuting is something you've just got to get through. I think in public health in general, pleasure is still broadly kind of understood as a kind of an obstacle to people behaving well, as something that we sort of need to rein in. I think when it comes to physical activity studies, still quite dominated by sport and this understanding of physical activity being about a sort of disciplining of the body rather than pleasure. And mental health, when I was kind of digging into that literature, I was like, well, you know, how come people don't know much about this in mental health, or they're still not super interested in the way that exercise in particular can improve mental health? And discussions in that literature were around how it's understood to be just too simple of a solution, you know, compared to the glory of theories of, you know, Freudian explanations of the mind, or, you know, psychotherapy or neuroscience. Exercise is just kind of a bit basic and hasn't really captivated mental health researchers yet enough. And I think just the sensory, we have a hierarchy of senses within Western cultures in particular. Culturally, we tend to think that the visual, next the auditory, are the most important, the most refined of our senses, and we tend to talk about health in those terms as well. So even our contact with nature, the green spaces, we express that relationship in visual terms. So not so much exploration of sort of kinesthetic pleasures, kinesthetic experience. There's still a prioritization of the visual, and that tends to cut out explorations, digging more into, you know, sort of kinesthetic experience and health, I think. I guess the other thing that it really made us think about together is how more and more discussions of transport futures are kind of missing conversations about the body. I just went to this exhibition at a transport museum recently. Perhaps it won't be surprising that, but anyway, they had visions of the future. And what was the vision of transport futures every decade? And in every decade, except perhaps the 70s, there's a little bit of greenery. There was a few people in the 70s. It was very tech-centered. There were barely people in there, and there certainly wasn't much interest in the body as a transport technology. So we're kind of losing our faith and our interest and our investment in the body as a transport technology as we get more sedentary. Rebecca Solnit, in her book Wanderlust, just writes beautifully about this problem. You know, I kind of think about it in a way as the body is a technology that's kind of increasingly being left to rust, both within society and by researchers. Solnit talks about the middle class body in particular as increasingly as a kind of an anachronism, a parcel to be moved around or a pet to be walked. She talks about the triad of the car, the suburb, and the treadmill. So yeah, I guess our research is into cycling experience has made us think about a few things beyond just cycling in terms of, that as I say, that importance of focus on salutogenic exposures, of that focus on pleasure, of that importance of centering the body in our discussions of the future, of transport futures. Yes, so that's all from me.
Well, thank you. Thanks, Kirsty. I hope that's given you some things to think about, and we'd be very happy to answer any questions in the time that remains.
So I have a question. So I was intrigued by your safety statistics. I mean, that's surprising. It's surprising to me. Could you tell us a little bit more?
Which of the statistics did you find surprising, Rob?
Just that it's sort of safer, generally safer to go to work by bicycle than by. I think that's what the data showed. Are there potential biases to that, or is it specific to? Is it specific to? I mean, it sounds like Auckland is quite similar to LA, maybe, in terms of congestion and has the sort of hazard of it. Are there biases to that, you think, in some way, or is it really?
Well, maybe, yes, sure. If you're talking about that table I showed with mortality rates, is that the one that you mentioned?
I think so. I mean, there were a couple. There was one where you showed, that it's safer than rugby. That's a low bar, But I mean, who would play rugby, And but then there
Out of New Zealand.
there were some mortality statistics. I mean, tell us a little bit more about. I'll tell you why I ask. LA's. I used to love to bicycle, and somebody stole my bicycle shortly before I came to LA. But I got here and I looked at the streets and how you get around here. I just couldn't imagine getting on a bicycle here. So I'm convince me that it actually is safe.
Well, it's partly what do you mean by safety, and the table I showed you with the mortality statistics was mortality from all causes, not just injury.
I see. Yeah.
And so that was making the argument that even if there is an increase in injury mortality amongst cyclists, it's small and is more than compensated for by the gains, the reduction in cardiovascular disease, stroke and cancer, which have all been shown, to be related to physical activity. I don't think Auckland is different to Los Angeles in terms of the traffic injury statistics, per kilometer traveled. It's still, higher rates of injury and death amongst cyclists than amongst people sitting inside a steel box. So the injury to occupants is less than the rate of injury to unprotected road users, pedestrians, and cyclists. Our point was, with the rugby story, that people feel fearful about going out on a bike, and their perception of risk is out of kilter with what the statistical risk is.
Mm.
People give no thought to climbing up a ladder to clear the gutters, really, but your chance of coming to harm are very similar to your chance of coming to harm if you ride a bike.
And
so
I guess
those were the points, I think.
I guess also that, you know, probably the bigger harm is likely to be inactivity. Is the other thing that comes out of what you presented, isn't it, Alistair?
Yeah.
There's much more to be gained in terms of physical activity than there is, you know, risk in terms of injury.
Yeah, but a little bit of bias there, Alistair, because I think in Canterbury, the rugby injuries would be less. We're tougher down.
So you say.
If you give him a chance, John will tell you all about rugby.
Oh, will he now?
Yeah.
So we've got two people with their hands raised. Suzanne, you have a question?
Yes, thank you. And thank you so much. I so enjoyed your talk. And to Rob, I dashed back from meeting someone for lunch and they were surprised to see me arrive and bemused to see me arrive on my bicycle, but I lived through it as I have many other. So I'm a super avid cycle commuter in LA, and I've been doing it for 20 years and I'm still alive and I've never been hit by a car, but I do choose my routes very carefully. But my question is, I also had the opportunity of spending a year in Cambridge, England, which is like a special zone for cycle development. And, you know, you're not allowed to drive a private car through the center of town. So there's huge pressure for people to cycle. And there, although admittedly some of the incoming roads are not so cycle friendly, but only like 20% of the trips are by bike. And, you know, and here it's like, I don't know what, 2% or less. And it seems just so difficult to get really significant amounts of people on to bicycles. So I was wondering what you have to say about the sort of realistic, how realistic it is to get a really significant shift.
Are you happy for me to start with that?
Yes, yes, go for it, Kirsty.
Yeah. I think we've seen, you know, just with COVID, you know, we've seen some examples, and perhaps that's a particular type of pressure in terms of, you know, the Paris transformation or, but even like pre-COVID in Seville, you know, like I think they got their mode up from like 1% to 6% in a couple of years just by putting in some infrastructure. It doesn't seem that difficult if you address those key things, like just basically less cars, slower cars, good infrastructure on arterial routes. We've got plenty of cities in Europe that are, you know, have got themselves up to, you know, 30, 40, 50%, and not it hasn't taken them a really long time. You know, Germany's really been pushing it. We know about those traditional examples of the Netherlands and Denmark. So yeah, I'm not sure it is that difficult, but different cities have different approaches to how much effort they're willing to put into it. I don't know if you have what you have to add to that, Alistair.
Oh, just to sort of on a small scale, I think there is lots of evidence that if people are given good infrastructure, you know, which is safe, which is connected, which takes you where you want to go, it gets used. And it's not used for every trip. You know, we're not looking at 100% mode shift. There are plenty of trips where you do need a car or a truck. Many people, you know, would prefer to use the bus or a train. But I think there are obstacles. That's quite true. It is difficult to shift, but it's not impossible. And I would say it's political will that's the major issue. You know, the technology's part of it. You know, what constitutes a good bicycle facility. I mean, that's an important question, but more important, I think, is how do we change the status quo given all the interests and forces that you know, that resist that kind of change.
So I think we have time for one or two more questions. Marvin?
Hi, yeah, thanks for meeting with us and for the presentation. I really enjoyed it. I was just gonna add some comments about what you were just talking about the mortality of, you know, how it does get a little more dangerous for cyclists, I guess you could say. But I think a lot of that too is that, you know, you have a lot of, but there's a lot of I've seen, especially in Dutch research, you know, a lot of the injuries tend to be among more, unfortunately, older people as they start losing the ability to react as fast. And so there are a lot of infrastructure things you could do, like, you know, just making sure the road is paved, for heaven's sake, which seems to be a problem so much in Southern California, and you know, doing other things that prevent that make it less likely that people will have these what turn out to be simple falls that just end up being serious impacts, and that would help reduce the mortality, the danger of cycling. And so it's bad for cyclists in some senses, but it could be way better. And I think we should definitely help promote that.
Look, thank you. That's a good point. We did a cohort study where we followed up about 5,000 cyclists very closely over time to see what their experience of injury was. And you're quite right that it was the single vehicle crashes, you know, it was bikes running into potholes or trees or slipping on the road. Those were the most common causes of injury, although they tended to be relatively minor injury. The important point about, you know, vehicle collisions, of course, is that they tend to be the severe injury. So yeah, I would agree with you that there's lots to be gained by ensuring that that where people ride their bikes is hazard-free and legible, makes sense.
Good. Well, we're right at 2, and we want to thank both of you. We have this climate crisis working group that I hope you'll be joining afterwards, Kirsty and Alistair, for a little bit. For the rest of the group, this is the last of our climate and health seminar series for the semester, and we're hoping to do it again. We're hoping to do it again in the fall. So if people have ideas for speakers, please send them to me or to John or to Sophia Gruskin. So thank you very much. Thanks everybody for coming, and Kirsty and Alistair, we'll talk to you shortly.